Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever accidentally wandered off the beaten path and stumbled upon something that made you question everything you thought you knew? A small moment that completely shifted your worldview. Picture this. It's a beautiful sunny day in 1988 at Norton Air Force Base in California. The annual air show is in full swing. Brad Sorensen, a talented aerospace designer, is there, probably expecting to see sleek jets, hear the roar of engines, a familiar scene. But then, an unexpected turn, getting a little lost, leads him away from the bustling crowd into a vast, quiet hangar and face-to-face with a sight beyond belief. 3 disc-shaped objects, completely silent, hovering a few feet off the ground. They look unlike anything man-made, or at least anything we thought was man-made. What Brad accidentally witnessed that day wasn't just a secret aircraft, it was a doorway, a journey into a world hidden in plain sight. A world of machines known as alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs, supposedly powered by a theoretical energy source holding unimaginable power, zero-point energy, and even some whisper capable of bending the very fabric of space and time. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we'll follow the trail left by witnesses and researchers. We'll explore the incredible stories from those who claim first-hand sightings and attempt to decode the seemingly science fiction concepts said to underpin these machines. And most importantly, we'll confront the chilling question: if this technology truly exists, why is it hidden? And what happens to those who get too close to the truth? Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what secrets lie hidden, not just out there among the stars, but perhaps right here, veiled by layers of secrecy? It's a question that stirs the curiosity within all of us, isn't it? So before we dive deep into the complex blueprints, the corroborating accounts from multiple sources, and the web of mystery that designer Mark McCandlish dedicated his life to unraveling, after hearing Brad's story, let's go back to that fateful moment, at Norton Air Force Base, where a door was accidentally left ajar. So here we are at Norton Air Force Base, 1988. Let's picture it clear. California skies, the buzzing atmosphere of an air show. The roar of jet engines echoes in the distance. Various aircraft are displayed on the tarmac, from massive transport planes to sleek fighter jets. For an aerospace designer like Brad Sorensen, this is familiar territory. A chance to network, to catch up on the latest technology. Or so he thought. But sometimes, the greatest discoveries aren't found on the intended path. Amid the event's hustle and bustle, Brad gets separated from his group. A bit disoriented, he joins another group, heading into one of the base's massive hangars, structures typically used for aircraft maintenance or storage. Perhaps he simply thought he was going to see some technical presentation. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Inside the hangar, the atmosphere was different. Fewer people, quieter. A 3-star general stood at a podium presenting on top-secret aircraft, subjects Brad in his role was quite familiar with. He thought he was in the right place until the general gave a signal. A massive curtain was pulled aside, and that's when Brad Sorensen's world turned upside down. Before him weren't experimental delta-wing aircraft or advanced engines. Instead, there were 3 disc-shaped objects, completely silent, hovering just a few feet above the concrete floor. They looked, as Brad would later describe, like something out of the 1950s, the classic flying saucer type we often see in movies. The smallest was about 24 feet, over 7 meters in diameter. The medium-sized one around 60 feet, 18 meters, and the largest reached up to 120 feet, nearly 37 meters. They had flat bottoms, sloping sides rising to a dome on top. On the dome were small bubbles that looked like they housed cameras. The general called them ARVs, Alien Reproduction Vehicles, a name that spoke volumes. Another nickname they used was Flux Liners. And then, as if for proof, a TV monitor next to the smallest disc began playing test footage. An ARV hovered silently over a dry lake bed somewhere in the desert. Then it executed abrupt maneuvers, looking like it was dancing in the air. Finally, it stopped, and in the blink of an eye, shot straight up into the sky like a bullet. The room was dead silent. Even seasoned aerospace experts had never seen anything fly like that. Where did this happen? At Norton Air Force Base, a major Air Force logistics command center, a critical link in the U.S. military network, a place seemingly dedicated only to routine transport and maintenance operations. But the history of military bases, especially in this Southern California region, close to legendary names like Edwards AFB, where speed records were set, or the rumors surrounding Area 51, has always been layered with secrecy. Perhaps the most extraordinary things are hidden in the most unexpected places. What's the small lesson here? Maybe that the biggest secrets aren't always kept in the most remote, isolated locations, but hidden in plain sight right within seemingly ordinary facilities. All it takes is a door left open at the wrong time, someone wandering off course at the right moment for the veil of secrecy to be lifted. And the lost wanderer, Brad Sorensen, after witnessing the unbelievable, did what perhaps many of us would do. He called a trusted friend and colleague. That was Mark McCandlish, also a talented aerospace designer. That phone call was nothing like their usual work discussions. Mark recounted that Brad was silent for a long time. When Mark asked what was wrong, Brad's voice was trembling, filled with fear and a degree of desperation. He said, "Mark, I think I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Mark was completely bewildered. Both men held top-secret security clearances. They worked for giants like General Dynamics, Lockheed, Martin, Boeing. They were often aware of experimental aircraft projects even before they were built. So what could possibly be more secret than that? What could make an industry insider like Brad so frightened? That question hung in the air. What had Brad seen inside those silent machines? How did they work? And more importantly, where did they come from? Brad mentioned the general had revealed part of the operating mechanism, and it was surprisingly simple. Mark McCandlish, with the mind of a designer and illustrator, knew he had to dig deeper. He needed to see it through Brad's description, to sketch it, to understand it. And that was the starting point for Mark McCandlish's journey. A quest to decipher the Flux Liner, to transform his friend's haunting account into a detailed blueprint of an impossible machine. Let's follow Mark in the next part as he begins to sketch the schematics of a legend. So picture Mark McCandlish maybe over coffee or lunch, sketch pad and pencil ready. His friend Brad is sitting across from him, still shaken, but now ready to share the details he couldn't risk saying over the phone. For Mark, this wasn't just listening to a wild story, it was an exercise in his craft. As an aerospace designer and illustrator, he was trained to visualize complex machinery, to understand form and function, and crucially, and Brad, despite the shock, seemed to remember everything. Mark starts sketching, translating Brad's words into lines on paper. First, the overall shape, the classic saucer flat bottom, sloped sides, a dome on top. But then came the specifics, the kind of details that make you pause. Brad described the very bottom of the craft, not landing gear, but a massive circular array over a foot thick. He called it a huge capacitor. Think of capacitors as devices that store electrical energy, like a battery, but designed for rapid charge and discharge. And this one formed the entire base of the vehicle. Stacked on top of this capacitor array inside the main body were familiar components. Oxygen tanks, necessary for life support, maintaining air pressure, just like in any high-altitude aircraft or spacecraft. Then, the crew compartment wasn't down in the main body, but up in that top dome, which Brad described as actually being a perfect half-sphere. Inside were jump seats for the crew, and detail Brad noted was fascinating, and perhaps telling the craft didn't look pristine. He mentioned seeing chips in the paint smudges, even fingerprints. These weren't museum pieces or mock-ups. They looked like working vehicles machines that had been handled, flown, used. This observation suggested they weren't brand new prototypes revealed for the first time, but perhaps part of an ongoing operational program. Then came the controls. Brad described a surprisingly simple setup. The pilot would have a lever in his right hand, likely controlling the amount of energy discharged from those massive capacitors. And in his left hand, something like a large trackball, the kind you might see on an old arcade game or a specialized computer interface. This presumably controlled the direction of the thrust, or the field manipulation, allowing for 360-degree movement. And windows. There were none. Brad explained that the pilots didn't look out directly. Instead, those small bubbles on the dome-housed cameras. These fed into what he called a synthetic vision system. Imagine putting on a high-tech VR headset today. That's the kind of immersive wraparound view Brad described the pilots having, seeing the outside world through the craft's own electronic eyes. Now, Mark McCandlish, translating all this, wasn't just drawing a fantasy. He was constructing a blueprint, applying his knowledge of materials, structures, and systems. The result wasn't just a sketch. It was a technical diagram drawn to scale of what seemed to be a functioning, albeit highly unconventional flying machine. Let's pause here for a moment. How does this Flux Liner design compare to the cutting edge of known aerospace in the late 1980s? This was the era when the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, developed in secrecy during the 70s, was publicly acknowledged. Its design was all sharp angles and flat panels dictated by the limits of computer modeling at the time to minimize radar signature. The ARV, with its smooth curves and classic saucer shape, was the opposite of that stealth philosophy. Rumors also persisted about hypersonic reconnaissance aircraft, maybe something called Aurora. But those concepts involved extreme speed in linear flight, likely powered by advanced ramjets or scramjets, loud, hot, and needing conventional runways. Again, completely different from the silent, hovering, instantly accelerating craft Brad described. So we have a paradox. Brad said the ARVs looked like something out of the 1950s, yet the technology implied, silent hovering, incredible acceleration of synthetic vision, was, and arguably still is, futuristic. How could something look both retro and hyper-advanced? Here's a little food for thought. Sometimes the process of trying to document something extraordinary, like Mark sketching Brad's account, is powerful in itself. It forces fuzzy memories into concrete lines and shapes. It turns a fleeting observation into something tangible, something that can be analyzed, questioned, and investigated further. That drawing became the anchor for everything that followed, and anchoring it all were the two claims that truly defied belief, the statements Brad attributed to the three-star general, giving the presentation claims that Mark McCandlish now had to incorporate into his understanding of this impossible machine. First, that it was powered by zero-point energy. Second, that it could travel faster than the speed of light. These weren't just claims about advanced engineering. They were claims that broke the known laws of physics as we understand them. Zero-point energy, faster than light travel. What do those terms even mean? And could they possibly be real? To even begin to understand the potential of the Flux Liner, we need to grapple with these concepts, especially that first one. Zero-point energy. It sounds like science fiction, but the idea has roots in actual physics. What is this mysterious energy source? And could it really power a machine like the one Brad Sorensen saw? Let's dive into the strange world of quantum mechanics next. The name itself sounds like something straight out of science fiction, doesn't it? Zero-point energy, or ZPE. To understand it, we need to take a quick detour into the wonderfully weird world of quantum mechanics. Now, in classical physics, the kind most of us learned in high school, empty space is just empty. A vacuum is a void, nothing there. But quantum mechanics, which governs the universe at the smallest scales, paints a very different picture. According to quantum field theory, empty space isn't empty at all. It's actually a bubbling, frothing sea of activity. Imagine tiny waves on an ocean that looks perfectly calm from a distance. Or think about the faint static or snow you used to see on an old analog TV when there was no signal. That visual noise actually contained a tiny component influenced by these quantum fluctuations. Virtual particles are constantly popping into existence and annihilating each other in incredibly short timescales. It's a constant underlying hum of energy throughout the entire universe. This background energy, the lowest possible energy that a system can have, even at absolute zero temperature, 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit, that is zero-point energy. It's not energy we typically interact with, but theory says it's there. Now, you might be thinking, okay, sounds theoretical, but is there any proof? Well, there is some indirect evidence. The most famous example is the Casimir effect predicted in 1948 and later measured experimentally. If you place two uncharged, perfectly reflective plates incredibly close together in a vacuum, we're talking micrometers apart, they will actually be pushed towards each other by a tiny force. The explanation: the ZPE fluctuations. The waves in the quantum sea are slightly suppressed between the plates compared to the outside, creating a minuscule pressure difference that pushes them together. It's a real measurable effect stemming from this underlying energy of space itself. This is where things get really wild. Physicists like John Wheeler and Richard Feynman calculated the theoretical energy density of this quantum vacuum. The numbers they came up with are astronomical. You might have heard the famous analogy mentioned in the documentary about Mark McCandlish. The amount of zero-point energy contained within the volume of a single coffee cup could theoretically be enough to boil all the oceans on Earth. Now hold on before you start planning your ZPE-powered car. That coffee cup number represents the total theoretical energy density. It's like saying a Category 5 hurricane contains immense power, which is true. But actually, capturing and using that power in a controlled, practical way is an entirely different challenge, one we haven't come close to solving. Most of this vacuum energy might be fundamentally inaccessible or require conditions we can't possibly create. It's not like dipping a cup into an energy ocean and pulling out usable power. This discussion often brings up the name Nikola Tesla, and rightly so. In a way, Tesla was a brilliant visionary who dreamt of tapping into the ambient energy of the universe, famously stating his hope that humanity would eventually attach their machinery to the very wheelwork of nature. He experimented with resonant frequencies, wireless power transmission, and harnessing atmospheric electricity. His ideas certainly resonate with the concept of free, abundant energy. However, it's a common misconception to equate Tesla's work directly with modern quantum ZPE theory. Tesla operated decades before quantum field theory was fully developed. While his ambition inspires many in the free energy field, his specific proposed methods are generally different from the theoretical approaches scientists today might consider for interacting with the quantum vacuum. So, where does that leave us? Here's the scientific consensus. Zero-point energy as a background energy of space-time predicted by quantum mechanics and evidenced by effects like Casimir is real. However, the claim that we can readily extract significant amounts of usable energy from it to power homes, cars, or especially something like the Flux Liner currently lies outside of established, experimentally verified physics. There's no known practical mechanism to do it. This is where legitimate scientific inquiry often blurs into the realm of fringe science or pseudoscience, where ZPE is sometimes treated as a proven, suppressed power source without rigorous evidence. And perhaps here lies a small lesson. Science thrives on exploring the unknown, on pushing boundaries with mind-bending ideas. But the path from a fascinating concept like ZPE to a working technology requires extraordinary evidence, repeatable experiments, and rigorous theory. It demands we remain curious and open-minded, but also critically evaluate claims, especially the extraordinary ones. So, if zero-point energy, according to mainstream science, isn't a viable power source yet, how does that fit with Brad Sorensen's account? Was the general mistaken? Was Brad mistaken? Or does the existence of something like the ARV imply a breakthrough in physics that remains hidden from the public? A secret understanding, perhaps reverse-engineered or independently discovered, that allows access to this cosmic powerhouse. The ZPE explanation raises more questions than answers based on what we currently know, which means if we're trying to understand the Flux Liner, we need to look for other pieces of the puzzle. Did anyone else see these craft? Are there other accounts that corroborate Brad's incredible story? It turns out Brad Sorensen wasn't alone. The story doesn't end with his chance encounter. Others have come forward with remarkably similar descriptions, sometimes decades apart. Let's hear their stories next. As Mark McCandlish dug deeper into the story, asking questions within his network, he discovered that Brad's experience at Norton in 1988 wasn't necessarily unique. The echoes of that silent hovering craft seemed to reverberate through time, often linked to places known for pushing the boundaries of flight. Let's travel back even further to 1973. The location, Edwards Air Force Base, California. This place is legendary in American aviation history. Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier here, the space shuttle landed here, countless experimental X-planes have taken to the skies above its dry lake beds. It's a place steeped in both innovation and secrecy. Enter Kent Seelan, an Air Force crew chief, working at Edwards. One day, he was sent out to repair some equipment. Just a routine job. As he drove across the base, he passed a hangar with its doors slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, he glanced inside. What he saw stopped him. Cold. Inside the hangar, hovering silently just above the floor, was a flying saucer. Without any prompting from Mark McCandlish, later on Kent described it almost identically to how Brad Sorensen would describe the ARV he saw 15 years later. A flat bottom, a domed roof, and smaller domes on top that looked like they held cameras. No landing gear, just hovering. Before the shock could even fully register, Kent found himself staring down the barrel of a gun. A harsh voice ordered him to shut his eyes, get down on the ground. A bag was thrown over his head, and he was forcefully taken to an interrogation room. What followed was an intense 18-hour debriefing, a process some might grimly describe as a verbal colonoscopy. They wanted to know exactly what he saw, who he told, and to ensure he never spoke of it again. Think about that, 1973, 15 years before the Norton incident. The description is eerily similar, and the reaction immediate, aggressive, and designed to instill absolute silence. It suggests two things. First, that whatever these craft were, they may have been around for much longer than Brad's 1988 sighting implies. And second, the level of secrecy surrounding them was, and perhaps still is, incredibly high. Enforced with extreme prejudice, the accounts continued to surface. Mark McCandlish eventually connected with Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, a retired Air Force pilot with his own history of investigating UFO phenomena, particularly during his time flying in the Arctic. Mark described the ARV Flux Liner to Colonel Stevens, hoping for any kind of recognition. Mark asked him, "Colonel, did you ever encounter or photograph anything matching this description?" According to McCandlish, Stevens didn't just recognize the description. He had photographs. These photos, purportedly taken in 1967, showed a craft remarkably similar to the one Brad and Kent described. Mark noted the primary difference was subtle. The camera bubbles on the dome seemed larger in the 1967 photos. His logical explanation: camera technology miniaturized significantly between 1967 and 1988, allowing for smaller housings on the later models he believed Brad saw. Now we have to be cautious here. These are just photos presented years later. Their origin, clarity, and authenticity haven't been independently verified to scientific standards. But within the narrative Mark McCandlish was piecing together, they represented another crucial data point, potential visual evidence from 2 decades before the Norton sighting. And the stories weren't always dramatic encounters. Mark even heard anecdotes like one attributed to an unnamed colonel, suggesting a strange normalization of the secret within certain circles. The story went that high-ranking officials or VIPs could fly into Norton AFB, ostensibly for a golf tournament or meeting, and during their visit, be quietly escorted to a hidden facility for a viewing of the craft, almost like a perk of being in the inner circle. Again, it's an anecdote, not hard proof, but it paints a picture of compartmentalized secrecy and privileged access. So, what do we make of all this? We have multiple individuals separated by years. sometimes decades and different locations. Norton Edwards, describing strikingly similar unconventional aircraft, often coupled with accounts of extreme secrecy or intimidation. This brings us to a valuable little lesson in investigation, whether you're looking into UFOs or just trying to understand history. Eyewitness testimony can be powerful, especially when multiple independent accounts start to align and show consistent patterns. It suggests there might be a real phenomenon underlying the stories. However, memory is tricky. Perception can be flawed and extraordinary. Claims always demand scrutiny. We have to weigh the consistency of the accounts against the lack of hard, physical, independently verifiable evidence. It's about looking for the pattern, the signal within the noise. The pattern here seems clear. Multiple people describing the same basic design over a significant period. If the design is consistent, what about the technology that makes it fly? We explored zero-point energy, and while fascinating, it remains largely theoretical in the public domain. Were there other, perhaps older ideas about propulsion that might connect to these strange craft ideas involving principles known even in ancient times or explored in the darker corners of 20th century history? The descriptions of the ARV's potential inner workings, particularly involving spinning components and perhaps exotic materials, start to resonate with other, even more obscure historical accounts and legends. Let's venture into that territory. Next, exploring connections that stretch from ancient India to Nazi Germany. Let's start with a journey way back in time to ancient India Hindu epic texts like the Mahabharata and the Vedas, written thousands of years ago, describe incredible flying machines used by the gods called vimanas. Now, for centuries, these were largely considered mythology, poetic descriptions of celestial chariots. But some passages, when read literally, are surprisingly specific about their construction and propulsion. Listen to this excerpt, often cited from the ancient Vaimanika Shastra. Though its own authenticity is debated, inside one should place the Mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus below. By means of the power latent in the Mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in the sky. Another text mentions vimanas capable of vertical ascent and descent, moving forwards and backwards. The key recurring element in some interpretations, Mercury often described in connection with heat or some kind of vortex or whirlwind. Now, is this a literal description of ancient advanced technology, perhaps even extraterrestrial, as some ancient astronaut theorists propose? Or is it allegory, symbolism, or simply imaginative storytelling from millennia ago? Mainstream scholars lean heavily towards the latter. But for someone like Mark McCandlish, trying to understand the ARV with its rumored internal mechanisms, which we'll get to, perhaps the mention of Mercury in an ancient flying machine context felt like a possible, albeit faint, historical echo. A thread worth noting, even if highly speculative. Let's jump forward now to a much darker chapter of history: Nazi Germany during World War II. We know the Nazis were experimenting with advanced rocketry, the V-2 jet aircraft, the Me-262, and were desperately pursuing nuclear weapons. But fringe historical accounts and conspiracy theories also speak of even more exotic research deep within the SS hierarchy into technologies far beyond conventional weapons. One of the most persistent legends is that of Die Glocke, the bell, According to these controversial accounts primarily popularized by the Polish journalist Igor Witkowski, citing alleged classified documents, Die Glocke was a metallic bell-shaped device, perhaps 12 to 15 feet tall and 9 feet in diameter. The core of the legend revolves around its propulsion system, 2 cylinders counter-rotating, spinning in opposite directions, filled with a dense mercury-like liquid substance codenamed Zerum 525. This device supposedly required immense amounts of electrical power and produced bizarre, dangerous effects when activated, emitting radiation, causing organic matter to decay rapidly, and generating strong electromagnetic fields. Now, we need to be very clear. The existence of Die Glocke, as described, is not accepted by mainstream historians. There's no definitive proof, no wreckage, no verifiable primary documents. Many historians view it as a myth, possibly born from misinterpretations of conventional secret weapons projects, post-war propaganda, or pure fabrication. Witkowski's sources remain controversial and unverified. However, despite the questionable origins of the story, look at the description of the alleged propulsion system: 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled with a mercury-like substance powered by electricity. Does that sound familiar? It bears a striking resemblance to some of the internal components described for the ARV or Flux Liner, based on witness accounts and McCandlish's attempts to reverse engineer its function. So, we have ancient Indian texts mentioning mercury engines and Nazi legends describing counter-rotating mercury-like cylinders. Is this a genuine technological thread spanning millennia, or just a coincidence based on Mercury's unique properties as a liquid metal? Let's address the physics directly. Could spinning mercury, whether heated or electrified, actually produce anti-gravity or significant thrust in the way these stories imply? Based on our current understanding of physics, the answer is almost certainly no. While magnetohydrodynamics, MHD, deals with the behavior of electrically conducting fluids like mercury and magnetic fields, it's typically applied to things like plasma containment or specialized pumps, not defying gravity. Claims of mercury vortexes generating anti-gravity effects are firmly considered pseudoscience by the established scientific community. This brings us to an important consideration when exploring these kinds of mysteries. Are these historical parallels, Vimanas die Glocke, genuine clues pointing towards a hidden lineage of technology? Or are they red herrings? Interesting stories, perhaps, but ultimately unrelated detours that cloud the main investigations. Here's a crucial lesson for any investigator or critical thinker. It's incredibly easy to fall victim to confirmation bias, to see patterns and connections where none exist, simply because they fit a narrative we want to believe. We have to constantly ask, is this similarity truly significant, or am I just grafting unrelated legends onto the core mystery because they sound intriguing? While the tales of Vimanas and Nazi bells offer tantalizing, if highly speculative echoes, they don't give us concrete answers about how the ARV, the craft witnessed by Brad Sorensen and Kent Seelan, supposedly flies. They remain fascinating side notes, perhaps, but not solid ground. So let's circle back to the ARV itself, back to McCandlish's blueprint and the effort to understand its mechanics based on the eyewitness reports we've touched on, the power source, ZPE, and potential historical threads. Now, how was this machine supposed to actually move? And more importantly, how could it possibly achieve the second bombshell claim, traveling faster than the speed of light. That claim takes us from questionable history and fringe science into the realm of theoretical physics that challenges the very foundations of Einstein's relativity. Let's explore how something like the ARV could theoretically break the cosmic speed limit.